want to do an intro?
Yes, I will share my screen, Alex, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. Okay, great. Thank you. A very good afternoon, good evening, and Rachit, good morning to everyone. Welcome to our 50th session, and that's very interesting session. Today is about security and licensing in Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation. So today agenda is first I'll quickly walk you through about our group and we'll also speak about our upcoming sessions. Before we begin, I would like to highlight a few important disclaimers. All the views expressed during this session are solely those of speaker and do not represent the view of their employers or Microsoft. For any demonstration purpose, we will be using console demo data and lab environments. Please note that any recommendations shared during this session should not be applied directly to your production environment. They should be first tested in a sandbox or any non-production setup. Lastly, all these sessions, including today's session, is being recorded on Microsoft Teams. If you do not consent to being part of this recording, I believe this is the right time to disconnect. And as I said, sessions are recorded. You can anyways go to our YouTube channel and view those recordings later. A quick introduction about our group. Well, we started this group around 3.5 years ago with a simple but powerful goal to share knowledge, connect like-minded individuals, and grow together. Over the years, we built a space where professionals can learn, collaborate, and inspire one another through regular sessions, discussion, and shared experience. Uh, this group is managed by four volunteers, Rachit, Umesh, Satya, and myself. To keep connected with this group, you can take a screenshot of those QR codes. We are on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. If you have any topic to represent in this community, feel free to reach out to any of us. We would love to hear from you more. This is our YouTube handle where we publish all the previous sessions we delivered in this community. Today's session is all about licensing, and Alex, who is principal software development engineer and MVP and good friend of mine, will be walking us through this really complicated, complex licensing. I won't steal much of his intro. I'll let him sign in shortly. And right after this session, next Thursday, we have upcoming session on financial navigation by Lone Guru and Ulrika. So that's me, Alex. I'll hand it over to you. Good luck.
Thanks, Deepak, and thank you for the invitation to present. So I will grab screen share back here. Like was mentioned, today we're going to be talking about security and licensing, focusing on the licensing piece to this, and really kind of talking about what changes Microsoft has made to the licensing methodology, the enforcement, the changes that have happened in the last 6 to 12 months from that. So really taking a deep dive there. I will try to keep an eye on the chat or Q&A as we go through this, so feel free to drop your questions in there. There's also a slide at the end if we want to do that as well. The PowerPoint for this is actually going to be, I already have it up on my website. So this QR code will take you to my social media drop page, which has a presentations download link. So if you want to follow along and download this, it's out on my website from there. Deepak kind of gave a quick overview, but for a little bit deeper introduction, my name is Alex Meyer. I work as a principal software development engineer at a company called Delinea. You may know me from a previous role in FastPath. So Delinea acquired FastPath. So that's kind of where the change occurred there, but I'm still working in security, audit, compliance, licensing, functionality within the dynamic space. So that's kind of where I've made my mark. All my contact information is there in the middle. Have a Microsoft MVP award from BizApps and some of the work that I've done in this space, and I've done webinars and sessions like this across the US and in Europe. So really excited to be here today. Thank you everybody for joining. So without further ado, let's go ahead and we can dive in and talk about what are we going to actually cover today. So first and foremost, we're going to look at the Dynamics 365 FSC security model itself, right? And the reason we start there is because of the second bullet point, which is how does security and licensing really tie together? And so F&O is somewhat unique in that space. And so we'll talk about what that association is. And then we'll look at the new licensing model and kind of what changes have happened. Where did we start? Where was the middle ground, and where are we kind of finishing here from the licensing side, the enforcement piece. And we'll talk about some of the new stuff that just came out in September that Microsoft changed again surrounding that. And then we'll talk about the reporting side, right? Whether you're doing it from PPAC, LCS, or user security governance in D365. So a lot to cover. So looking forward to the session here. So a couple quick notes from my end, I guess. Everything that we're going to talk about today is accurate as far as I know as of today. I think we all kind of know, especially in the licensing space, things can definitely change. So don't take this a year from now and try to apply what we're talking about today without making sure that there wasn't an update since then. So definitely be sure to, this is a fast moving space, so be sure to keep up to date on it. I do not work for Microsoft. So you're more than welcome to, vent as much as you would like about your frustrations with the licensing. But I also didn't have any input on the licensing changes as well. So you can feel free to complain to me, but unfortunately, there's only so much that I can do there. So definitely, I've done this session in some form a couple times already. So sometimes this turns into a license therapy session, and that's completely okay. We're all in this together. We're all trying to, at the end of the day, become compliant, learn about this going forward. So 100% something that we can do there. So let's go ahead and jump into the actual material itself. So we're going to take a really quick look here at the security model of F&O or FNSC. And really, when we're talking about this, right, if you've listened to myself or maybe another Microsoft MVP, Andre DeCavalon, or if you've just been in the security space before, you've definitely probably seen this graphic in the past, but it really kind of lays out what the overall security model within D365 really looks like, right? You have your users at the top. Under your users, they're going to be assigned roles, right? Because this is a role-based security model. Those users can be assigned one or more roles, and those roles then contain duties and privileges, which are smaller groupings of permissions, right? And then at the very bottom, you have your object level permissions, right, which are the actual securable objects in your system. So that's, looking at the menu items or the tables, data and these service operations, right? And so those duties and privileges and roles are just different groupings, right, of those objects that you can build up in this hierarchy fashion. And so really, when we're talking about the security, there's kind of two main categories to this. There's security layers, which are those security roles, duties, and privileges. Those are where you're creating the associations. And then there's the securable objects, where you're actually setting up the object level permissions, your read, update, create, and delete, and assigning what that user can actually do. And so the reason we do this really quick overview of the security model whenever we talk about licensing is because, like I kind of mentioned at the top, your security and licensing within D365 are connected, right? They're tied together, meaning that the security that the user is assigned in the system will directly impact or directly correlate to the license that's required for that user, right? And so this makes F&O and FNSC a little bit unique in the business application space, in the sense that it's not based on what you consume or utilize in the system. It's based on what you are assigned or potentially could do, right? And so it's really easy in F&O or FNSC to over-provision user access, which then results in a higher level of requirements from a license perspective for that user, which directly results in higher costs. So when you're talking about this, a lot of the times the pushback, right, that previously, especially before the enforcement piece, right, was, well, we don't really want to spend time and effort on security and licensing. It's not a big deal for us, right? And when you can then tie it directly to, or when you can tie it directly to dollars being spent by your organization, it's a much easier proposition or to take to your leadership team and say, hey, this is something we need to focus on. We need to really focus on making sure that our security and licensing is correct. And the direct ROI from that is the license requirements or the payments we're making to Microsoft and the overall cost of ownership of the business app itself, right? So that's one of the key pieces here, is that you really want to look at this from a security perspective as well as the licensing side, because you can't really focus on one or the other. So this is a really quick, or this is an overview of the licensing guide mapping, right? So if you go in and look at the 70+ page licensing guide that Microsoft puts out a couple times a year, right, you'll find some graphic like this somewhere buried in there. And this really kind of drives home the point that we're at a point now where Microsoft is requiring different licensing or licenses based on the area, right, that you are within the D365 environments, right? So you no longer can get an overall like D365 sales or customer engagement or a unified ops type of license that just blanket covers the entire application. You really have to look at what areas that user has access to dictate which license are being required there, right? So that's really the overall licensing guide from this from the biz app side of things. And then the question becomes, okay, well, what if my user has access to multiple areas, right, of D365, or requires a D365 FSC license and a customer engagement or sales license? And that's really where this idea of the base and attached license really comes into play, right? So Microsoft has this idea where you have a base license that's going to cost X, right? And then you can attach additional licenses to that at a reduced rate, right? And so this table really shows that overview of the of which licenses can actually be attached, right, to other licenses. So you have your base licenses on the left here, and then
I got your point. On 7th of October, he has asked for a meeting, but since
Guys, can you please go on mute if you are speaking? Thank you.
And then along the top here, right, you can really see the different licenses that you can attach and the price associated with them, right? So you can see that the attached licenses are going to be at a much reduced rate as compared to the overall cost of the base license there. And this is in USD, by the way, as well, this table. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into what are some of the changes, right, that have occurred in the last little over a year of the licensing, user license requirements, right, within D365. So I really like to set the stage and go, where did we come from with this, right? And so it used to be, if you go way back into the like AX 2012 days, right? This is when this type of licensing started, and I call it entry point based licensing or menu item based licensing, right? And the idea was that each menu item in the system actually had two different properties on it that would dictate if you had read access to this object, right, you would require whatever license was associated in the view user license parameter, right? And then if you had a create, update, or delete, whatever license within the maintain user license parameter of that menu item, right, would dictate the license requirements here, right? And so that was kind of the initial start of licensing within D365. And so what would happen is you would look at all of the objects the user was assigned, all of the menu items, go through all of the access that they had and look at that maintain user license and view user license parameter of each menu item to dictate which license was actually required for that user. And then in 2019, once we jump to the D365 space, right, this is where you started to get that privilege-based licensing wrinkle into this, right, where Microsoft also did another check to basically say, well, which license SKU did you need, right? Your finance, supply chain, commerce, project ops. And so it really was a combination of both your entry point based licensing and then what I would consider privilege based licensing to dictate which the license requirement was. And so that's where we were all the way up until March of this year, of 2025, is when Microsoft really started to put out some new licensing functionality surrounding this. So if we start taking a high look at this, our high level view overview, right now your license analysis is going to be done at the object level. And so there's no privilege portion of this anymore, right? It's all going to be looking at what objects that user has and the access that user has to them. The other key point is that previously all of your license calculation was handled within D365 itself. And so you could have this potentially have different license requirements based on where you ran certain license reports, right? So if you ran the report within D365 versus what you ran it in LCS versus PPAC versus M365, right, you might get different license requirements for the user because each system was independently running the calculation, right, to determine licensing. And so Microsoft wanted to get away from that. And so what they decided to do is that the Power Platform Admin Center would now be the source of truth for all your licensing, right? So there's that move from a more technical side of things, right? That Microsoft's trying to move from LCS into PPAC anyway. And so it kind of made sense to have PPAC also be the source of truth for licensing. And so what will happen then is that the data from that analysis in PPAC will then be pushed out into these other systems. So the data that you're seeing in D365, the user security governance piece, or LCS or M365, as far as licensing associated with D365 FSC is coming from PPAC, right? There's data flows that actually happen. And so if you go out and look on the PPAC report for licensing, which we will hear in a little bit, right, you'll notice that it says that there's a refresh time period, right? And so this time period has started going down. At first it was 72 hours and it was 24. Now it's 2 to 8. I still lean towards that there's sometimes that it takes up to 24 hours to see changes come across. But that's kind of the overall flow of that particular data, right? Your PPAC is going to be your source of truth, and then it pushes the data out to those other systems. All right. And so what do we really get into then is this idea, if you start looking at the data that Microsoft is using for this licensing, right, is that now each license has a quote unquote priority, right? And we'll actually look at what that looks like here in the upcoming slides. We'll actually do some SQL queries and be able to see what this data looks like. And so the idea is that now we have this hierarchy of licenses because Microsoft loves hierarchies of basically anything. And so they've made this hierarchy of different licenses in the system. And then what will happen is you'll go through and look at all of the objects that the user's assigned, determine what is the highest license requirement for that user, right? That's going to be your base license. And then you can attach additional licenses to that as well. So you kind of have these different license priority, or the licenses are in this hierarchy kind of based on the inverted triangle here, right, that I have set up. And then to further kind of help, I guess, categorize this, right, Microsoft has given a group name to certain licenses. So you kind of have your top tier in the red, right, that's going to be your finance, commerce, supply chain, and the premium versions of those. Your middle tier is going to be your project operations and human resources, and the bottom is going to be activity, team member, and HR self-serve, right? And then you can notice that each of those groupings has a different price point as well, right? So they're going to cost differently depending on which tier you're currently in. And then, of course, we have some license methodology changes as well. And so, like we mentioned previously, objects themselves are going to drive all of those license requirements, right? And so we actually have some new license types. If you go and start looking at the data that are going to actually dictate the license that this user is required to have. So we still have menu items just like we did before. So menu items, displays, outputs, and actions are in there. And some of the new license or new objects as part of the license calculations are going to be service operations, data entities, and data entity methods even. And so those are all new to this new license calculation that's occurring. One thing that we started to do at the tail end previously, it was like 10.34, I think, is when Microsoft first implemented it, is that read permission to an object is always going to be a team member license. So that's your base case in the system. But Microsoft does have the possibility to override that by basically saying we're going to enforce read permissions in the tables that we'll look at later. And so we'll actually look at how that looks and what that looks like coming up here. But by default, read permission to an object is going to be a team member license unless there's that special use case there. And then the write permission, which includes update, create, and delete, there's actually a licensing entitlement requiring or licensing element requiring entitlement table that actually stores that association, right? So we'll actually go in and look and see what each of these look like here in the upcoming slides. All right, so what does this object level analysis look like, right? So let's dive into what the underlying data starts to look like. So in 10.43 and newer, you'll start to see these new licensing tables show up in your D365 environment, right? And these set of tables, then, if you start to chain them together, we'll start to have, you'll be able to start to see this license requirement. So we'll start at the base here. This licensing all SKUs table is going to store the current licenses in the system and their priority ranking. So you can see that priority there is actually what is then going to dictate the order that the license ranking, right, is going to actually happen in your environment. So that's kind of your base table. Here are all your licenses that you potentially, right, might be able to be assigned. Then you have the licensing entitlement objects table, which is really just a table to show which objects have a license requirement to them, right? And so that is kind of just a overall catch-all table, right? And then the licensing elements requiring entitlement table actually says this. These are the objects, right, that actually require some sort of license, and that's where that enforced view permissions come in, right? So you kind of have your base table, that licensing entitlement objects table that says here are all of the objects, right, that potentially might require a license, and then here the licensing elements requiring entitlement, right, actually say these objects themselves require a license, and here's the enforced view permissions of those. And then you have the association, right, between object and the access level, right? Which access level in this case is either going to be 1 for your read permission or 2 for create, update, or delete. You have the entitlement object, which is just a rec ID lookup back to the object itself. And then the SKU rec ID are the licenses that would actually meet that requirement for that particular object, right? So we kind of listed out a bunch of tables there. What this actually looks like, and I have a SQL query here that kind of goes through and combines all of these and joins them together, is you have an object, right? You have the access level to that object. You have a priority, right, of the license itself. You have the SKU of the license itself. And so what you end up with is this idea of your object to license mapping, right? So you can basically see in this case that the abatement certificate object here, right, will, you can see all of the licenses that meet the requirements for that particular object, right? So if I need, or if I have create, update, or delete access to that abatement certificate object there at the top of this query, right, you can see that my actual lowest level license that I could assign in this case would be the operations activity license, right? These other ones would actually meet the requirements as well, but the lowest license requirement, right, is that operations activity, right? And so what's going to happen then is this is kind of your base query that's going to get ran, something similar to this. And then the licensing overview in this case, right, is that, or how this will actually then work behind the scenes, is that this user, right, that you have in your system, we're going to look at all the roles that the user's assigned, generate their user access at the end of the day, right? What's their effective user access? And then compare that or join that against kind of that query we looked at earlier and say, okay, look at all the objects that users assigned in the access type, right? And try to figure out what's the license requirements for that user. And so I kind of have a breakdown of like the water flow or the waterfall decision tree here, right? So really we're looking at generating user access based on all of the roles assigned to the user. We're going to determine which objects require the license based on that licensing entitlement all permissions table. We're going to look at the highest priority license required based on that object access. and that is going to be your base license for the user. And then you also then need to check, okay, does that base license also satisfy all the other objects the user's assigned, right? If it does, then that's the only license that user's required to have. If there's additional objects, right, those would then be attached licenses, right? So then once you attach an additional license, you need to check, okay, does the combination of these licenses meet the all of the user access? And then once you find that license requirement, right, that or the set of licenses that meet all of the objects users assigned, right, that's the final combination of licenses required for that particular user. So I know that's a lot to kind of digest, so I have an example to kind of go through really quick here. So I have two different objects, the dir party table menu item display in this case, and the cust table list page. So it's really the dir party table or your global address book page, and then your all customer list, right? So if I have the first scenario, right, if I have read access to either object, right, I need a team member license, right, because the enforce view permissions is set to 0 for both of these objects, right? So that's the base case there. If I have update, create, or delete permission to the cust table list page, right, you can see that that is actually going to require a finance or supply chain management license, right? Because those are the two licenses in that case that are the lowest priority based on that particular object, right? So that's the minimum license. I can assign a higher tier license, right? So if I assign one of the finance premium or supply chain premium license or supply chain management, right, those would all fit, but finance and supply chain are the minimum licenses that I could apply. And then on the flip side of that, if I have update, create, or delete to the dir party table object here, right, you can see all the licenses that are being assigned. And in this case, even if you have update, create, or delete to the dir party table, you still, your lowest priority license that would be required, right, is a team member license, right? So regardless if you have read or create, update, or delete permission to dir party table object here, right, that's going to require a team member license. But on the cust table side, if you have update, create, or delete, right, you need that finance or supply chain management license. All right, let me take a quick second. I've been seeing that there's been some questions coming in. I want to make sure some of these we might answer at the end. So I promise if I jump over your question, we will come back to it. But I know that some of these.
Alex, probably what we can do is I'll read out those questions towards the end of the session, and we'll try to answer. And if you want to do it now, that should be okay.
Yeah. Let's do that. Let's just hold them to the end here, and we can we'll go through them that way. So, okay, yeah. So that was the licensing example, right? That we kind of have, or that just to kind of show what that would kind of look like. To add to this a little bit, you may know that there are areas currently in D365 that do have license information, right? Whether you're looking at the view permissions report in the security configuration form, right? Or you're going in when you assign a role to a user, right? The license is listed there. There's also things like user license counts, user license history reports. Microsoft has made the decision that all of the legacy, I'll put that in quotes, license reports, right, are effectively going to be deprecated in the next few releases. So if you haven't already seen these reports and this data start to go away, you will as you start to update your D365 instance. But Microsoft made the decision that instead of trying to backfit or retro those older reports to include the new license logic, they're going to have all of the licensing reporting being done in the user security governance area, which will include all of the new license analysis that we are just talking about. And they're going to remove some of these license reports from these other areas. So if you start to see these reports go away, I actually have a blog post on this as well, right? It's not that there's anything wrong with your environment. That's what Microsoft's plan going forward is that you'll start to see those be removed from D365 and everything will kind of go to the user security governance area from a license reporting perspective. All right, so we talk about the changes from the license perspective, right? And the real question is, well, why did we do those changes? And the answer to that really is the idea that Microsoft wants to start to do license enforcement in D365, right? They do it in every other business app, and D365 is kind of F&O in particular, I guess, has kind of sat on the side and been kind of the special application, right? That kind of does licensing, right? You have to go through license renewals. You have whenever your contract comes up, right? But it doesn't do it. It's not a ongoing thing, and so that's something that Microsoft would like to change into this idea that every time a user logs in, they're going to do a license enforcement check to make sure that the user is licensed correctly for the access that they're assigned. So you may have started to hear this rumblings of this all the way back in March, April of this year. And Microsoft put out a couple different dates where they wanted to start to do this. First, it was May 15th, and then it was November 1st of this year, right? And so recently, they actually announced that they're pushing this all the way back to January 15th of next year. And so that's going to be the starting point for some of the license enforcement to begin in that case. But it makes it, there's another slight change to this, is that that's the starting point of when the license enforcement can begin. It doesn't mean that it will impact you at that date and time, because Microsoft has made the additional decision here that they're going to tie when this license enforcement is going to occur for a particular customer based on their anniversary or renewal date, right? And so the actual enforcement timeline is going to be different for every customer, because every customer has a slightly different contract renewal or renewal date, right? And so what actually is going to start happening is that 30 days prior to your renewal, you will start to see that soft enforcement start to occur, right? In which the screenshot that I showed previously on the previous screen is similar to what you will actually see. I don't know if that's exactly it. That was the screenshot that Microsoft shared, but you'll see some sort of notification if a user logs into the application and they're not licensed correctly. Hey, you need to contact your sysadmin. You're not licensed correctly, right? To avoid any service disruptions or anything like that. Then what will happen is you'll actually have your renewal or anniversary or contract renewal date, and then the actual hard enforcement, which will actually stop a user from logging into the system, doesn't occur until 15 days after your contract renewal date, right? So you kind of see this window, right, that you're now being able to see where the soft enforcement occurs for 30 days, actually technically 45 days, right, from T-minus 30 to plus 15. And then your hard enforcement occurs there at T15. So that's kind of the new timeline that you're going to see. So January 15th is not when this will kick in for every customer, right? That's the when the Microsoft is starting this new licensing validation timeline, I guess, at that point in time. So this was something that they just announced a couple weeks ago. So this is fairly new information on that front. If we start to look at then some of the other updates that Microsoft put out at the end of September, we got more clarification on what environment types will actually have this enforcement. And so Microsoft made a point to basically say that the license enforcement will only occur for Microsoft managed production environments. So if you have an environment that is a government cloud or China cloud, right, or something that Microsoft's not managing your production instance, those will not be impacted by this license enforcement. And so I kind of made a table here quick to kind of show where the different environment types will actually fall, right? So if you have a local VHD, your cloud hosted environments, your local business data, which are D365 on-prem, right? Those are all not going to report the license or not have any license enforcement piece to them. But everything on the right-hand side, your unified developer environments, your sandbox environments, tiers 2, 3, and 4, 5, sandbox tiers, and then obviously your production instance, right? Those are all going to be managed, or they are all Microsoft managed, and therefore would fall under the license enforcement piece. From a reporting side, I should point out here, right? The actual enforcement only goes into effect from a production instance, but you'll be able to report on these other ones as well. All right, so we have some other key pieces or key call outs, right, from some of the updates that Microsoft gave. And some of these are just clarifications, right, on previously known pieces of data. Some of these are new. For example, the B2B guest users, right, the call out there is that they have to be licensed like any other user, even if they're from another domain or tenant. Sysadmin role, right, does not require a license. So if you have a user that's assigned the sysadmin role, that user does not need to have any license associated with them as long as they are not doing business processes or functionality. Service accounts do not require a license as long as they are not assigned a role. And this is where it gets a little in the gray area, right, that provides interactive or business functionality, right? So as long as they are just performing some sort of service behind the scenes, data syncing, pushing data, things like that, they don't need a license. But if that user could actually log into the system and with those credentials and perform some task in the UI or have some business functionality, right, then that account would need a license there. A separate license has to be assigned for each tenant a user accesses. So if you are a consultant or partner and you're signing into multiple tenants, right, you have to be sure that you obviously have a license in each of those environments. And but if you have multiple production instances that fall under the same tenant, one license would suffice for all of those instances or all of those production instances, right? So it gets a little tricky there, but you have to remember that licensing is done at the tenant level, not at the instance level. And then don't forget that multiplexing rules still apply, right? So if you have an external service that or application, automation, anything that is either pulling data or pushing data into D365, modifying data, right, in some automated way, right? The users that are accessing that external app have to be licensed as if they were within D365 performing that task, right? So even if you have an app that, allows multiple users to log in externally and push data into D365, they technically, right, should, based on the multiplexing rules, should have licenses assigned to them. We all have this idea of external users. Microsoft has really defined that a little bit more or put some more guardrails up, right? So external users who access the system through designated external roles do not require a license. And I actually have a screenshot on the next page that show there's, I think, 50 some roles that Microsoft has called out to say these roles are system roles and do not require a license, right? But the key point to all of this is that if you take any one of these roles and you clone them or you customize them, right, then you start to break the terms, right, that Microsoft has created around these roles, right? So if you clone any of these roles and create your own and assign additional permissions to them or anything like that, right, then the users assigned that role would require the license associated with that. But Microsoft did call out, like I said, 51 roles in their latest update, right? That basically, and they said that none of these roles are going to require a D365 license if they're assigned to the user, right? It doesn't mean that if there's other roles assigned to the user, right, that user would be required to have whatever licenses associated with those other roles. But these roles themselves, right, do not require a license, right? So if you assign a combination of any of these, that user should not have any license requirements within D365. All right, and so they also listed a couple of different known issues in some of their reporting as well. So one of them is if you are using Entra ID group memberships to actually set up and assign access in D365, there's a known issue where the PPAC reports don't accurately reflect that. And so they're actually working on a fix. They gave a time frame of the end of October, so it should be within the next couple of weeks. And then also tenants that have multiple email domains were not being correctly counted, right? So if you had an environment that allowed for your parent company and a subsidiary to both log in, right? Those were not being counted correctly And again, the estimated fix is November 1st, so in the next couple of weeks, those should be addressed as well. All right, so we'll switch here a little bit to the license reporting side of things, right? So where can I actually look at the new license data? So if we want to start at the source of truth within PPAC, if you haven't already logged in and looked at this, right, you'll start to see licenses from finance and operations being available. So if you go into PPAC, you go to licensing, finance and operations, you'll start to see a report that looks similar to the screenshot here. It really starts to break it out. Breaks out the license requirements by type and then base attached versus how many you purchased. And then you can export this to a CSV if you would need to for detailed analysis. Obviously, you could use something like Excel to look at that. So this is the starting point where all the data is initially being generated. To give an idea of what this kind of looks like, right? This is what the CSV export would look like in your when you get into Excel. All right, so you're able to see this user's assigned this role. It requires this license. Here's the assigned license. All right, and then you also get your security role to license association there as well. If we want to jump over to LCS, you can get the same information that we were just looking at PPAC in that user license consumption report. And so you'll notice that the screenshot here looks almost identical, right? Because the data that you're getting, the data that is being reported on is from PPAC, right? So that report is going to look very, very similar to what you're seeing in PPAC there. If we wanted to start jumping into D365, Microsoft has a new, it's not a module, a standalone module, but it's a new area within the system administration called user security governance, which allows you to do a lot of different types of functionality around, privileged access and security design, things like that. But another part to this is that it allows for license reporting. And so there's a license usage summary report as part of this that's hidden behind a feature management flag. So if you don't see this report, ensure that you actually enable this feature in feature management. But what it does is that this new license usage summary report then has a couple different reports surrounding at the user role, duty, and privilege level, right? What's the license requirement for each of those levels, right? So in this case, you're able to see the user, the license that they're required to have based on their access in the system, and then the covered entitlements versus remaining entitlements. So you'll start to see, if you start diving into these reports, you'll see this idea of entitled versus not entitled comes across quite a bit. The idea is that the reports are going to show for this particular license, here's how many accesses are entitled or covered by this particular license and how many are still left or remaining. And so the top report, right, is going to show your overview, and then the bottom area is going to show the more detailed and show, okay, for this particular finance license, right, associated with the Alfonso user here, right, here are all the objects that are entitled, right, based on the finance license. And then you can also sort or filter by the not entitled as well to see, okay, well, which additional pieces do I need there? You can break this down further by user role license as well, right? So the user role license report is going to show here are all the roles assigned to the user and the license that's associated with that, right? So you can actually see, even if, for example, this Alicia user, she is going to end up requiring a supply chain management license, right? Because our purchasing agent role actually grants that. But you're able to see, okay, well, her budget clerk role is requiring activity license. The buying agent role is going to require activity license, and her employee role is requiring team member. So you get a little bit more detailed view of the other roles the users assigned in the license requirements for those. One key point that I did want to put out here is this idea that if you go and look at the role, duty, or privilege, you're at least for me, I was initially kind of confused by how this was laid out. But the way that this works is that for every role, duty, and privilege, the report is going to list out every license in the system and then tell you how many objects within that role are covered by that license, right? And so initially when I searched for this, or like search for the accountant role, I knew from past experience that it should require a finance license, but it initially showed me a commerce license, and I was like, well, why would it show me that? And so just to avoid some confusion, right, make sure that if you're looking at this, you filter by a particular role and you're able to see all of the licenses that are required or could potentially be assigned. And so the idea is that you're looking for a license that has 0 not entitled accesses, right? So in that case, you can see the finance and finance premium for the accountant role both fit that description. So that you know that if you assign the accountant role to a user, they're going to require a finance license in some way. And so you can see the same thing happen at the duty level, right? Where again, you're going to see this duplication or repeating of the different duties in the system and the licenses again that could potentially be assigned, and at the privilege level as well, right? So you're able to see all of those. All right, so we can go ahead and I have some final thoughts here, and then we can jump into questions. I did leave some time here at the end for those. So I apologize. I apparently forgot a title on this one, but really the idea is that the couple key points that I've been trying to pass on, I guess, to our clients and anybody that I'm talking to about this is that one, the user license assignment and review is much more important now, right? It used to be in the past where, you know, you could get away with this idea of, oh, just assign them, you know, whatever role, we'll true up their licenses later on. It's not a big deal, right? And there wasn't really a requirement or, you know, any sort of, there wasn't anything forcing you to do that review, right, at the time of assignment. And now if you assign a role to a user, right, they don't have the correct license associated with that, right? Once you come to that contract renewal date and you start having the hard enforcement, right, they wouldn't be able to actually sign into the app anymore. And so as part of any sort of role assignment or any changes to the roles, duties or privileges in the system, you really you really need to have some sort of review process to ensure, you know, hey, I went in and made this change to a user role assignment or a role duty privilege access. Did I change the license requirements, right, for the user themselves if I'm assigning in or a new role, or the users assigned to if I change a role, right, any user assigned to that role could potentially have a new license requirement, right? So we really need to have some sort of process in place to ensure, hey, you know, what does that potentially look like, or what is the impact of this particular change? The other key point here is that even though Microsoft has delayed this multiple times, license enforcement is coming. So for those that are maybe sitting on the sideline and going, you know, hey, I don't know if Microsoft's ever going to implement this. You know, they keep pushing it back. I don't really want to spend the time or effort as part of this to actually review these, right? I think it's becoming more and more apparent. There's a lot of pressure from leadership at Microsoft to actually get this implemented. And so this will become an enforcement in some way, shape, or form. So it's better to be proactive about this and ensure that you're compliant from your license perspective. Like I mentioned, right, you really need to start having some sort of review in place when you're doing user role assignments, changes to user security role doing privilege changes, ensuring that the license impact is that you know what that impact is prior to actually publishing those, and being sure to test all your changes in non-prod first, right? So now that we have reporting at multiple layers, right, we can start to do our changes in a test, ensure that the license is implications of whatever change we're going to make are what we expect, and then before we push it to prod. The other key point that I'll put out here is that your licensing requirements can change with updates to PPAC that does not require a D365 update. And I've had this happen to myself as well, where I'll go in and run a user security governance report one day, and I'm the only one that logs into this environment. I'm the only one so I know that there hasn't been an update to D365, hasn't been an update to security or user role assignments, and I come in the next day and the licensing reports are different, right? So that means that PPAC changed in some way, right, and pushed down those changes to my environment. And so something else to keep in mind that even if this kind of has to be an ongoing process, right, to ensure. And hopefully, the idea is that the changes to PPAC should slow down, right, once we start getting into the actual enforcement. I would hope. But as of right now, you want to make sure that even if you went through and done your compliant or become compliant, that you do have a process of still checking to make sure periodically, right, that nothing has changed on the PPAC side that would change your license requirements from there. So with that, at the end of the slide deck, I have a bunch of resources from myself, from other MVPs that have written about this as well, Microsoft resources around this as well. So be sure to check those out. And Deepak, with that, I will open this up for questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alex. And I'm sure there are a lot of questions around this as expected. So yeah, let's start on the questions first. So first question we have from Jonas is, if I implement dual write and make customization to dual write maps, at what point will I have to assign a SCM license to my seller to stay compliant?
Ooh, that is a great question. All right. At what point will I have to assign an SCM license to my sellers? Okay, so it would be, I mean, obviously it's going to, be whenever you are, your customer or your organization actually has license enforcement start. Obviously it has to be before then. But at what point do I have to assign an SCM license to my sellers? So if you have dual write from an external system, right, you basically have to treat the external users, right, as if they were in D365, from my understanding. Dual write gets a little messy because Microsoft has carved out some of these. So this might actually be a great question to ask your Microsoft partner as well to get their firm input, because I have not seen a whole lot of information around dual write in particular. So I don't want to lead anybody astray on this point. But my understanding, right, would be that dual write would kind of fall under the multiplexing type of rules in that case, right? And so if you have somebody in CE that is dual writing to F&O, I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't want to give you the wrong answer, so I don't want to. I honestly don't know what that requirement would be in that case. As of yet, that is a really, really good question.
Great. Next question we have, if a user needs finance base and project operations attached, but in admin center only, finance license is assigned, then also will it the new informants restrict the access to the user?
Yeah, so this falls into, I think, more of the reporting discrepancies that are still being reported, right? Because you'll still have sometimes where PPAC will show one thing, but if you go in and actually do a deep dive into the license requirements in like user security governance in D365, I've had a couple people reach out and they're like, I don't see how the analysis is actually picking like this license up or not. At the end of the day, so one, if you come into a scenario like that, please open a support ticket with Microsoft. Two, unfortunately, the way that this will work is that if PPAC is telling you that you need finance and project operations, right, since that's the source of truth, right, that is what the requirement is going to be, even if you know that the user only requires a finance license. And so that's why I'm a big fan of trying to get Microsoft involved as early as possible in those types of scenarios, because if you can prove to them like, hey, there's something wrong in this logic that PPAC is reporting one thing, but I can go in and actually show that this, should require another license based on the kind of methodology that I showed, right? We should be getting Microsoft involved to see what's going on, because once enforcement does start, whatever's in PPAC will be the requirement, right? And so we want to make sure that gets corrected.
And Rachit, I believe a couple of more questions from you only again, which we received from community member. Would you like to take that up?
Yeah, thanks, Deepak. Thanks, Alex, for the great session, great insights as always. these are a few questions from the wider community in Australia who are not able to
Okay.
join the session.
Yep.
You have answered a few of them already, but one is around anything new in terms of support or escalation and minimum SLA for licensing issues? Like, is there any separate support offering from Microsoft for licensing, or it goes under the normal support?
Yeah, that's a
Plan?
really good question too. I have not seen anything new. I think they should offer something like that if I'm going to give my personal opinion, but I have not seen anything other than, like the, Yammer or the Viva groups, right, that everyone has set out. But as far as like the actual like support uh, structure, I have not seen anything new on the licensing side.
Thank you.
If there is, I'd be happy. I'd be really happy to hear about it, but I have not heard of anything.
I mean, getting the normal support is also a bit tricky nowadays, Rajit. You need to go through that AI first.
Yep. I'll just quickly run down these questions. I know there
Yep.
are questions from other people as well, and we are running just on the time. So basically, you all already talked about the license enforcement for non-production environment.
Yep.
Is there any timeline in place for hard locking the users to stop using some functionalities due to under licensing? I think it's around the timeline. The hard lock will come after 15 days of their anniversary
Yeah.
and all.
Yeah, and just to point out there that it's not like the hard enforcement is going to be that during sign in to the application, the user would be stopped. So it's not like if you're under license that you just won't be able to use certain parts of the app, right? As far as I know, the way that this works is that if you're not licensed correctly for your assignments, right, it'll actually stop you during sign in. So just one key point there.
Thank you. The last one is there any enforcement on the database usage limit as a part of this
Yeah.
and this separate
Yeah.
enforcement?
Yeah, that's a great question too. You'll notice that I didn't cover that, and that was by design. So there is a database component to this that potentially in the future Microsoft can start to enforce. However, their first line or their first wave of this, right, is going to be strictly around the security side of things. So while I know that there is a storage component to this, I would focus more on the security side than the storage limits because at the end of the day, the Dataverse platform itself was not made to actually handle some of the extremely large D365 instances, and the pricing model for Dataverse does not make sense for those D365 instances. And so Microsoft's going to have to do something surrounding that. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know
Yeah.
what that's going to be in the future, but their first wave is focused on the security side. So that's what I would focus on and kind of leave the database usage for another time. Because if you try to get both of those correct right now, I think that is a large chunk to chew off in the near term.
Makes sense.
But I believe the database enforcement is already there now, Rajit. One of my customers recently had that. We had a very long calls with Microsoft where they said, okay, no, we need to enforce that already. So
Yeah, we
Wow.
will start
that part
getting.
is already
Okay.
started. Yeah.
That's crazy to hear, Deepak. That's
Okay.
You anyway
We
get
have
that capacity warning once you reach 15% or 25% of your utilization, and that is driven by your number of licenses. So yeah, thanks for answering those. I see there has a hand up, but yeah, back to you, Deepak. Yeah.
okay. I think I had a question that's already answered. Anyways, we have asked like we can have that query shared. I believe yes. If you scan this QR code, Mehboob, you will get to this slide, these
Sorry, I
slides,
think you
and can
missed a
get those
question
access.
from William, Deepak. There's a question on
Yo, sorry.
manufacturing
Yep.
execution. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a question from William. If I make customization to manufacturing execution interface, is there a risk that I will have to get the full SCM instead of a single operation device license for my blue collar workers?
yeah. Device licenses get a little hairy as well, because Microsoft designed those roles specifically for devices in most cases, right? So if you start messing around or modifying those, it becomes a very could they start to go after that? Yes. I don't think if you customize the base license or the base role that you would trigger that in the current logic, but that doesn't mean that Microsoft couldn't change that in the future and say, hey, if you modified this, like you're going to have whatever license is required for that. So I'd be very careful around customizing any of those device specific types of licenses. So there would have to be a pretty good use case to actually do that, in my opinion.
Brilliant. Next question we have from Paula Subramaniam. How to identify license for each role from role license form? As of each role, it would display 11 SKUs. Can we consider the highest entitled for each SKU and consider that as a final SKU for role and duty?
Yeah, this is kind of where we were talking about, right? If I go back, maybe. Right, you have that idea of when we look at the reporting side here, right, where you're looking for that not entitled to be 0, right? So that's really going to dictate which license is required for that particular role, duty, or privilege. And any role, therefore, that has, or any license that has 0 as not entitled would meet the requirements for that particular role in that case.
Good. Next question we have from Edward. Do we know how or where we can see anniversary renewal dates? I believe by PPAC.
Yeah, I think I was going to say PPAC or LCS would probably be my.
For on LCS, definitely it's not there, Alex. It must be on PPAC or with your account manager, ideally.
Right. Yeah. If you reach out to your account manager at Microsoft, they'll obviously be able to tell you as well.
Next question we have from RD. If Power Apps are being used with FO, how does the license work in this scenario? For instance, if user wants to perform cycle count on mobile device using Power Apps.
Yeah. So this is where it gets a little tricky because anything external, right, starts to fall under that multiplexing idea. But device licenses again become a little bit. If it falls under a device license itself, right, that's slightly different. But yeah, you would if a Power App is being used and you're not using like a device already device object, right, or device license and role itself, right, then you would have to license every user using that Power App as if they were in D365. But it becomes there's some gray area there, right, around device licenses versus what is an actual like multiplexing type of solution. So we might want to dive into that and probably reach out to your either Microsoft rep to get their input on that as well, because there aren't a whole lot of guidelines yet around the device piece to this.
Yeah, I mean, whenever we need to interact with FNO from external system, this makes things more complicated.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. I have one question, Alex, like how I can differentiate whether it's my service user, because I cannot give them a sysadmin. I saw you mentioned sysadmin doesn't count under license.
Yep.
But let's say I have a service user which is supposed to work on the specific batch job or like thing. I need to create a new role for that, for the sake.
Yep.
But still, how I can differentiate it's a service user and it shouldn't consume a license.
Yeah, that's where it becomes a little tricky. Like again, Microsoft has that list of roles, wherever that was, right?
Yep.
Basically, if you can fit your service account into any of these, then they don't really require a license. If you can also, I guess prove to Microsoft, right, that the even if you have a custom role, right, service accounts in there, and you assign it to a service account, and you can prove to them that they don't sign in, right, because that was the other thing. The call out in the like the FAQ and the licensing guide was they don't have any user interaction or activity. or business application, right, then you potentially could get away without having the license requirement for that. But again, if you're having to create custom roles, it adds another layer of complexity to it, right? And you're not able to use some of these default roles that Microsoft has.
Understood. We have another question. The user in this. Yes. I think it's about the anniversary again. Artie, using Power Apps to create the execute inventory journals or posting process shipped purely on apps, would they require F4 license in this case?
Execute inventory posting. Sorry, I'm just reading the question. The user engaged.
It's okay.
Using Power Apps to create and execute inventory journals. Yeah. See, yeah, when you start to get like that detailed, create and execute inventory journal and posting. Yeah, anytime you start to bring in Power Apps, right, to the Power Platform, to F&O, right, it opens the door for a multiplexing question. So could you get away with it without needing an F&O license? Potentially, if you can make that argument to Microsoft, but I think by default, those users would require a license. If they're using a Power App, anything that automates the process of pushing data into D365 or removing data from D365 is kind of the definition of multiplexing.
Right. I'm just trying to find where there's a question because there are no prefixed with a question.
Right.
Yes, we have another question from Gafar. PPAC has provided the missing license report for production users. If we will recreate the affected user privilege and roles and validate the changes in the non-prod environment first, is there a way to generate a view the missing license report for our non-prod environment so we can confirm licensing before promoting changes to production environment?
Yeah, you should start to be able to see, even in your PPAC reporting, you should be able to start to see non-prod instances starting to show up, right? So that was where the reporting side, I think I got it brought. Like you'll start to see these Microsoft managed, if you're doing sandboxes or other tiers that are managed by Microsoft, right? They're in scope for the reporting, but not for the enforcement. So if you can get your license or the security set up into one of those tiers, right, and then validate that the licenses are what you think, right, that would be the testing that I would do from that case, right? Because then okay, if I promote this to production, like here's what, like the same functionality in PPAC is going to be ran on your production as in your non-prod, right? So if you can get that scenario into a sandbox environment or even into one of like a UDE, right, where you can get it to a point where you can start to see that data in PPAC, right, that would be the testing that I would do from there.
We already overshooted for about 10 minutes, Alex. There are a couple of people wanted to ask the question if that's okay, or we can ask them to shoot through email or chat. We can answer them later. Whatever works for you.
Uday has been waiting patiently for a long time, so maybe Uday, if you want to ask, that can be the last question.
Yeah, I'm happy to hang around for a couple more minutes.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. So there, yeah, please feel free to unmute yourself and go for it, buddy.
Thank you, Uday here. Thanks for this opportunity. We are an ISV company, Alex, basically. So this question is more about the billing process, what we used to follow for the customers. There was a legacy report called license user count. We used to generate billing to each customer based on that PDF report. Now that report is deprecated and its data is also scattered across new tables. Recently, with the help of Yammer forums and Andri, we are studying a table called the direct license assignments, the license user direct license assignments. So we are trying to find out a place or multiple tables where we can capture all the assigned all the users in the system with assigned licenses.
Yep.
So do you have any inputs like this table? I think we did some experiment, assigned users with a role, and it's actually capturing, but it's not capturing the ISV, pure ISV roles. And what will happen if we assign any user role via the PowerPoint admin, PPAC. Will it also be captured in this table?
So the way that I've done this, because I'm an ISV as well, and we relied on the user license count report previously, right, to do our licensing for our FastPath product, is I've actually written a Excel. I need to check to see if I can release this because I don't think there's any reason not to, but that takes the data from this license usage summary report here, right, and basically distills it down into what that user actually does and gets all the counts right across the board. So it generates the same data as user license count report used to do, right? It tells you here's how many operations or that enterprise tier licenses you need, how many activity licenses, how many team member, right? But it's really just doing counts on this and kind of breaks it out in different ways. And so that's the data that we've been using. You can absolutely, there's again, like you mentioned, there's multiple ways to go about doing that. If you want to, create either a custom data entity or a SQL, a service operation, right, that you can hit, right, that, hey, we're going to deploy our package and it's going to expose the endpoint. It's going to query directly from that table. That would be in that direct user assignments. I was looking for a way that we could get the data without having to put any custom code into a customer environment, right? So that was one of the ways that I kind of went about it. So, but definitely, if you want to reach out afterwards, I'm happy to chat about kind of what I'm seeing and how we've been using it, and try to come up with a solution.
Sure. I would love to connect with.
Yep.
Later. Thank you.
For sure.
Thank you very much.
So we have one more hand raised from Sardan.
Yes, thank you. Quick question. I have a user which has an admin assigned role in test environment, and he has a regular roles which are not admin in production. So that fact actually prevents user to get to the license usage summary list. So it's not the only thing that if the admin role is assigned to a user in production, even the admin role is assigned to user in a test environment, that user is not going to be visible under license user summary. So as you know, the whole idea of sandboxes, test environments is for people to have more access, right? So how are we gonna manage this, and what's the best approach?
Yeah, so the admins, you have a couple different options, right? In your test environment, you could potentially have a normal user and then an admin user, right? And so you could potentially have the copy, right, of the user themselves, right, in your sandbox. Let it get it and use that as hey, this is our copy from production of the user. The user actually is going to be signed in as a sysadmin, but here's what they look like in production, right? So it'd be user_prod or whatever, and let PPAC do the ingestion there, right? So an analysis of the user license. So that's another option I think you could potentially do, right? To still have the ability to log in as a sysadmin and test, but still then have a user, right, that mimics what that user looks like in prod, so you can see their license requirements. That's one potential option. It's a little bit more maintenance, but if you are going to have, depending on how many admins you have in your test environment, right, that may or may not be tenable, but that would be one option that I could potentially see. The other one would be that you have a license, quote unquote, period in your UAT where everyone gets assigned what they are, for a 2 or 3 day period gets assigned what they are assigned in prod. Let PPAC ingest that and do the analysis. And before you actually promote, right, be able to look at the output of that result and make any changes that you need. So those are the two different options that I could potentially see in that case. I know we're coming up on time. I will go through any questions in the meeting chat that we didn't get through after this meeting. I can post the query in here I'll try to answer any questions that I can as well. So if we didn't get to it during the session here, you can obviously email me as well, or I'll try to answer the questions in the chat.
Brilliant. Time to wrap up then. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you so much being part of this milestone. It was our 50th session, and thank you everyone who spared their time to attend and witness this wonderful session. Much appreciate, Alex. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining. Great to be part of it. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Those recordings will be available on YouTube, everyone. Please feel free to review. There we'll be uploading in a couple of days there. Thank you.
Sure, Deepak. Thank you.